Alright, I know, it's been a minute since my last upload, but that's because I was cooking up this absolute banger for you all in the background, and I finally finished it up. So today, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to present to you the top must-have PvE weapons that came with the Lightfall expansion. I make these videos as one massive too long didn't read like weapon review guide for basically the entire season, every single season, so you don't have to watch a bunch of different videos to get the info you want. And that said, these videos do take a while to make as I use and test each and every weapon in a given release, so hitting that like button would help out a ton. And if you'd like to become a part of the less than 20% that are subscribed to the channel, please hit that subscribe button to see more PvE Destiny content from your boy. Anyways, I have plenty of picks to go over with you guys today, as well as a bunch of honorable mentions. We'll be talking about these weapons one by one, going over how to farm/get them, as well as what their best perk rolls are for PvE. So without further delay, let's jump into it. Kicking off the video, I figured we'd talk about the auto rifle weapon category first, seeing as they'll be receiving a whopping 25% damage buff in the very near future. For those that don't know, Bungie dropped a TWAB recently featuring some really nice info on primary weapon buffs, and a lot of the weapons I'll be talking about today have this weapon buff in mind. Auto rifles get 25%, you have sidearms, pulses, hand cannons getting 20%, and then you also have scouts getting 10%. It's a really nice buff. It'll definitely help shake up the sandbox, and I just want to make sure that you guys know that before we get into it. So anyways, starting with the auto rifle category today, let's talk about the 𝗵𝗵𝗆𝗄𝐿 as well as the 𝗵𝗔𝗱𝗔𝗔 𝗵𝗴𝗃. 𝗵𝗵𝗆𝗄𝐿 is up first as the much more new player-friendly option, being as it's obtainable through the Season of Defiance battlegrounds, as well as being focusable at the helm via the engrams. It's very easy to get and resides in a very popular archetype, the 600s, alongside being Strand Element. It brings with it some nice perks, the notable ones being 𝗕𝗵𝗄𝗡 for a reload speed buff when far from enemies, as well as Envious Assassin for overflowing the magazine when getting kills with other weapons. These options can be paired with Demolitionist for grenade energy, Tricorn as well as Target Lock for boosted weapon damage, as well as Hatchling if you're building into Threadlings with your Strand subclass. All in all, it's a great pick overall, but the one I'm truly interested in is of course 𝗵𝗔𝗱𝗔𝗔 𝗵𝗃. This one is a bit less friendly to newer players to Destiny, as you do need to run the Brood of Nightmares raid to get it, but given how chill that raid is compared to the rest of the game, I would say that the trade-off is worth it. 𝗵𝗔𝗱𝗔𝗵𝗃 is a 720 RPM Strand auto that makes its claim to fame in the form of the perk department. Whereas 𝗵𝗵𝗆𝗄𝐿 has fairly tame options, this auto on the other hand just goes all out crazy. I'm talking reconstruction or rewind rounds paired with Target Lock, or Demolitionist Adrenaline Junkie, and even perks like Thresh for super energy, Pugilist for melee, and other damage perks like Frenzy and Paracausal Affinity, with Hatchling yet again being there for those leaning heavy into Strand. 𝗵𝗔𝗱𝗔𝗵𝗃 𝗵𝗃 already stood out to many players because how awesome those perks are, and now with the 25% buff to auto rifles being paired with those perks and the excellent RPM, I see this thing being an absolute monster in PvE content in the very near future. Pulse rifles. I only have a single one listed here, and that's going to be going to the 𝗵𝗆𝗆𝗄𝗏. Now, the gunsmith sold a pretty good roll of this pulse rifle yesterday, I believe, or the day before, but I myself and many other people missed out on said roll, and because of that, shout out to my boy 𝗵𝗆𝗆𝗍 the Poop Monster for helping me get gameplay with this weapon. Anyways, 𝗵𝗆𝗆𝗆𝗏 is a very interesting weapon. It's a kinetic 450 RPM pulse that only comes from the world loot pool, and with no means to focus engrams from world loot weapons like we previously could, weapons such as this can be super rare to come by in the wild outside of the gunsmith and 𝗍. If, however, you're lucky enough to bag a good roll, you'll have one of the better anti-champion options in the game on your hands. This pulse rifle comes with the new kinetic exclusive perk, Kinetic Tremors, and what this perk does is it basically causes shockwaves to pulse out from enemies that you're repeatedly shooting. This means that in more casual content, the perk won't have much of a use, but in more in-game oriented and champion-oriented content, this thing will shine incredibly bright. It's excellent for countering champions as it can proc things like Overload and even burst barrier shields, and if you're lucky enough to pair the Kinetic Tremors perk with Shoot to Loot, it can even proc that perk for you as well and pick you up ammo across the battlefield. Combine all of what I told you with the fact that 𝗵𝗆𝗆𝗏𝗏 gets one of the best origin traits in the game in the form of field tested, and you can see why I speak so highly of it. Sidearms. Yet again, I only have a single must-have listed for the category, and that is going to go to Michael's Reverence. Now, were it not for the 20% damage buff coming to sidearms, I may not have featured this weapon in today's video, but the truth of the matter is that sidearms have always been very effective in PvE, and this is only going to skyrocket their usability when the buff drops. The damage potential of this weapon is insanely good, with the trade-off of course being range. If you're able to close the gap effectively without putting yourself at risk, you'll be a literal death machine with this thing in your hands. It's a 450 RPM strand sidearm with some nasty perks, but do keep in mind that it comes from the 𝗏𝗏𝗡𝗏 raid. In the first column, we have Unrelenting for healing, which is honestly very nice on a sidearm given how dangerous close combat can be, as well as other options like Thresh, Rewind rounds, and even Pugilist. These can all be paired with Frenzy, 𝗁𝗲, 𝗿𝗔𝗓, and 𝗏𝗏𝗱𝗄𝗏 to make for a damn fine weapon to pair with some crazy strand builds that we got with Lightfall. I'm usually a sidearm hater, but I even have to agree that with the buff, this thing is going to be nuts. Submachine guns. I got two bangers lined up for y'all. Here we have the Immortal as well as the Hero's Burden. Ironically, these are incredibly strong PvE weapons that come from in-game PvP, but they're definitely worth the hassle in my opinion. Starting with the Immortal, this has to be one of the best feeling primaries in the game for me right now. It's a strand SMG that's in the 750 archetype, which is my favorite, and it's also boasting some of the best base stats out of any other weapon in its class. Combine this with the field-tested origin trait and its amazing perks, and you have what I would classify as a 10 out of 10 on your hands. With perks like Perpetual Motion, Threat Detector, and Surplus being able to be paired with Target Lock, Kill Clip, Demo, and Hatchling, you have plenty of different avenues that you can take this gun for your individual playstyle. It's truly one of the only weapons that can actually get me hyped to play PvP because I'm looking so much to getting the specific god roll that I want. And just in case the design of the weapon didn't give it away, this gun unfortunately comes from Trials of Osiris. Now onto the cousin of the Immortal, we have the Iron Banner SMG known as the Hero's Burden, and I'll be honest, this weapon is in a very similar boat as to the last, where it really makes me not mind playing PvP all that much because I know I'll get a banger weapon in return. For those that like higher RPM weapons, you'll love the Hero's Burden, as it's a void SMG that's in the same archetype as Funnel Web. And what makes this weapon very special is the fact that it's the only primary in the game that can get stabilizing rounds. This perk basically works like Incandescent, for example, except instead of exploding the target you kill and spreading Scorch to everyone around it, it replaces those Scorch stacks with a volatile debuff, allowing you to then shoot those enemies and cause them to explode and chain react. I've seen some people not exactly care too much for this perk overall, but I'd say I'm a pretty big fan personally. Getting the Hero's Burden with Feeding Frenzy into stabilizing is just such a nasty combo, and with it being the only primary in the game with this newfound Void perk, I'd definitely say that it warrants it as a must-have. Grenade launchers. We have some absolute spicy ones here. We have the Regnant, which will be your heavy GL, mainly used for boss DPS, and Harsh Language, which you'll mainly use to become a literal Godslayer in the flesh. I'll explain in a bit. First up, we have Regnant. Remember how everyone was farming for a Wendigo last season to get ready for the heavy GL buff? Yeah, well, Bungie completely invalidated that when they decided to drop this bad boy via the season's Battlegrounds. It gets the role of autoloading holster and Explosive Light, with Explosive Light enhanced allowing you to carry an extra stack of the buff, which by the way is pretty damn nice considering it more than doubles your damage output. As you'll see with the gameplay in the background, it does pretty great damage, and it can also synergize with Volatile Flow this season to stack volatile rounds on top of Explosive Light, just for a little bit of extra damage too. I like this weapon a lot, and I use it quite often whenever I'm running the new raid. It's pretty great. Now moving to something that's useful outside of just boss or champion DPS, we have an absolute ad clearing god in the form of Harsh Language. This weapon is the only void wave frame that we've gotten since Season of the Hunt, and hot damn is it powerful. It rolls with absolute nutty perks, but what you're either going to want to aim for is destabilizing rounds, or what I personally recommend, Repulsor Brace. Repulsor Brace on this GL is just going to allow you to go absolutely crazy inside a crowds of enemies, especially with Gerfalcon's Hunter, and essentially just be unkillable. Thankfully, we have Volatile Flow as an artifact perk this season, so both Titan and Warlock can greatly benefit from the playstyle too, just without invisibility. Run any mod that would get you consistent orbs of power to proc volatile rounds, and then just go crazy slinging shots from this GL. You'll be unkillable while also stacking bodies like nobody's business. Now, unfortunately, it is a world loot weapon, and for people with bad RNG, that can be very hard to get your hands on. Funnily enough, I landed myself a god roll on stream just a few days ago, and I was pretty happy to say the least. Shotguns. Here for the shotgun category, we have one singular weapon, but it's so good it might as well be 5. Here we have the literal energy version of Heritage, the Nessa's Oblation. This 𝗫𝗏𝗍𝗍 comes from the Root of Nightmare's raid and can get the exact same role as Heritage in the form of Reconstruction and Vorpal, and hell, it still gets even more than that. We have Fourth Times, which can be paired with Vorpal or Focus Fury, and even Repulsor Brace, which can be paired with Destabilizing Rounds. I'd still overall recommend the Heritage role, but the shotgun definitely gives variety for those wanting it. Regardless, Heritage is still one of the best special weapons in the game by far for burst damage on beefy targets or chipping away at a boss's health bar, and Ness's Oblation will simply make sure that you can still take Heritage with you wherever you need it, even if your kinetic slot gets taken up by something else, let's say Izanagi's Burden. Trace Rifles, or Trace Rifle, because yet again, we only have one weapon, and that is the 𝗍𝗔𝗔𝗡𝗔 Dejection. In a world where double special is just such a strong loadout to use, 𝗍𝗔𝗔𝗡 Dejection is an absolute must-have for anybody wanting to incorporate Trace Rifles into their setup. I'm a very big fan of Retrace Path from Dares of Eternity myself, but 𝗍𝗔𝗔𝗡 is literally if you took that trace and just hit the upgrade button. Instead of Subsistence to pair with Incandescent, you have the options of Field Prep, which will give you even more reserves for the double special playstyle, Reconstruction, which will passively reload your weapon and overflow it for you, as well as Rewind, which can restore your mag based on how much you beamed an enemy before killing it. Even if you didn't want to go the incandescent route, you still have plenty of other options like Frenzy, Target Lock, and even Paracausal Affinity, which are all fantastic perks, and if you're someone that doesn't want to run the Root of Nightmares raid, Retrace Path will suit you just fine. However, if you're able to actually do it, I highly recommend crafting this absolute beast and putting your Retrace Path up in the storage closet. Fusion Rifles, our final weapon category of the video before hopping into honorable mentions. Here we have the Iterative Loop, as well as the Briar's Contempt. Starting off with Iterative Loop, this weapon is the best fusion we've gotten for the energy slot since Cartesian Coordinate was meta. One thing I never realized when talking about this weapon is just how high of a Volt Shot damage multiplier it has. Volt Shot will deal differing amounts of damage depending on the weapon type you're using, and Volt Shot on fusion rifles just absolutely slaps. Given the right scenarios, you can put in some serious work with this fusion, and grinding out one to craft either Compulsive Reloader or Lead from Gold with Volt Shot is definitely worth your time. You'll find this fusion by grinding 𝗎𝗍𝗔𝗡, and I believe on certain days inside the Terminal Overload event. On the flip side, from a special fusion, we have the Briar's Contempt Linear Fusion, which I know Linears caught a nerf fairly recently, but they're definitely still an amazing weapon type to use overall, especially in situations like Nightfalls or Master Raids, when you have a surge or modifier that benefits them. Briar's is a 3-burst solar linear that can roll rewind rounds, demo, or reconstruction, combined with Frenzy, Surrounded, which might work in some cases, as well as Focus Fury. Demo is definitely nice for Starfire Warlocks, by the way, which is why I mentioned it. As someone that runs GMs each and every season, this is a must-have for me personally, as linears are always a great option for dealing with champions and bosses whenever there's a modifier that beefs them up, so I highly recommend running the raid for this one if that sounds like it's up your alley. Now, with that said, this video is getting long enough as is, so let's slide on over to the honorable mentions and do a bit of a lightning round. I got 5 honorable mentions that didn't quite make the list but are still good enough for me to cover them, so let's go over them. First up, we have the Coronac 22, I believe that's how you say it, which is a 600 RPM solar auto rifle from the World Loot Pool that rolls with Feeding Frenzy and Incandescent. If you're someone that likes auto rifles but not slow firing ones like the Omet for example, then this one is for you, and I personally really like it. Second, we have the Philotactic Spiral, which is the 𝗎𝗍𝗓 Arc Pulse rifle. I feel like we already have a decent selection of arc pulses, plus I'm not a fan of the 340 RPM archetype, but it rolls Keep Away and Volt Shot, and maybe that might be enough for some of you to want to grind it out. Third, we have the Circular Logic. I personally really love machine guns, but I feel that's a fairly rare take to have, so I decided to throw this one in the honorable basket. It's the same archetype as Hammerhead and Commemoration, which tons of people love, and can roll with Envious Assassin paired with Hatchling, Tricorn, Target Lock, as well as Demo. It's super good and great for my Strand homies out there, and you'll find this one on 𝗎𝗍𝗓. Fourth, we have the Rakentur Stasis Bow from Season of Defiance. It's easily the best legendary stasis we have, but the competition it has is basically non-existent. It's just an overall good combat bow and can roll with Wellspring, Shoot to Loot, and Archers in the first column, with Explosive Head or Headstone in the second. Lastly, for the 5th honorable mention, we have the Prodigal Return. This is the first time we've gotten a legendary lightweight arc GL since Salvo, I believe, and this one can roll with Field Prep, Lead from Gold, and Envious, which can be paired with Volt Shot or Demo. It being able to have blinding nades is also a pretty big selling point, and I like this weapon a lot as well. Anyways, with that all said, in this 3,000 word script coming to a close, that is going to do it for this season's episode of the must-have series. This video covered every single notable weapon that came with Lightfall and Season of Defiance, and if you felt that I missed out on one that was important, make sure to let me know in the comments. Regardless, I hope you all enjoyed this one despite how long it actually took me to get it posted, and I cannot thank you enough for watching all the way up until this point as it really helps the channel. That said, I'd like to wrap things up by giving a shout out to all the lovely people that help out with the channel via Patreon and YouTube memberships, as they help keep the channel going, and it helps me afford things like this new microphone you're hearing me talk into right now. For my Patreon supporters, we got Admis, John, Serenity, and Boomernoob in Tier 2, with Austin, Cinco, and Glumia in Tier 3. And for my Tier 2 YouTube members, we have a lot of beautiful individuals. We have Kira Gira, Truly Boss Gaming, Imposter, 𝗵𝗄𝗡𝗍𝗍, Ram, Brandon Fisher, Rocky, Ghost, Irvine, Hornby, Mad Ghost, Peak, Salt, 𝗵𝗄𝗱𝗏, Mamimi, Bluesman, Clear, Angel, Ben McClellan, Mayhem Gaming, and Serenity once more. Once again, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.